Hello, boys and girls. We are reading Echo, and we have read the preface for our book, and we learned about Otto, the messenger, and we learned about Eins, Zwei, and Drei, and those are the three daughters of the king, the princesses, and we learned about Fredrick, who is from Germany, and the story is continuing with Eins, Zwei, and Drei because their brother, who is now king, is looking for them, as well as the mother of these daughters. The only problem is the witch that was raising them sent them to another world, and she placed a spell on them. And the person who saved them also has to bring them out of this world. So, we are on chapter 3 this week, and we're still with Fredrick. Let's find out what happens. On that morning, 4 years ago, Fredrick had followed Elizabeth into the primary play yard, as he had every other school day. As usual, she steered him to a bench away from the others, and he knew what he was supposed to do. Stay there and be still. But the night before, Father had taken him to the ballet to hear the orchestra, and the music had stayed with him as it always did. Every movement, every refrain from Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty, still playing in his head, especially the waltz. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Fredrick had hummed it all the way to school, and no amount of shushing from Elizabeth could make him stop. And while she checked his lunch and pulled his sweater tighter around him, he raised his arms, waving them to conduct an imaginary orchestra. Elizabeth took both of his hands in hers, eyes pleading. She said, "Fredrick, please, don't make it more difficult for yourself. You already have enough problems." "I hear music," he said, "and I hear the names the others will call you if you continue to wave at the sky. Do you want the boys to throw rocks at you again?" He shook his head and looked up at her. "Lisbeth, they call me Monster Boy." "I know," she said, stroking his hair. "Don't listen to them. What do I always say? They're not my family, and my family tells me the truth." "That's right. And I say you are a talented musician, and someday you will be a conductor. But for now, you must only practice at home. Remember the trick that I taught you." And Fredrick nodded. "If I think I might wave my arms at school, stuff my hands under my legs and sit on them." "Right," said Elizabeth. "Now, stay here until the teacher rings the bell. I have to go or I'll be late for class." And she kissed his cheek. Fredrick watched her walk toward the secondary school, her blonde curls bouncing behind her, and he tucked his hands beneath his legs. But the music from the concert pestered him until he couldn't resist any longer. And he freed his hands and swished an imaginary baton. Closing his eyes, he escaped into the rhythmic waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And he didn't realize he was creating a spectacle, or that all the children in the schoolyard were watching him. He was so caught up in the music that he never heard the laughing or the taunting, or the boys running up behind him, until it was too late. And the next morning, before the first bell, Father marched into the headmaster's office with Fredrick limping along beside him. I want you to see what your students did to my son yesterday. A lip so swollen he can barely talk. A cut on his forehead that had to be stitched, and a broken wrist. He'll wear the sling for weeks. The headmaster leaned back in his desk chair, his hands resting on his belly. Mr. Schmidt, the incident was nothing more than boys being boys, a little playground bullying. Fredrick needs to toughen. Skirmishes are the best thing for him if he's to learn to defend himself. We try to keep an eye on these things, but given his disfigurement, Father's voice tightened. It is only a birthmark. If you wish. But given this imperfection, and with all that waving of his hands at the sky, he tilted his head at Father. You must admit, it's odd. His strangeness bothers some of the others, frightens them. And the headmaster raised one eyebrow, and he says he hears things. Father's cheeks puffed, and he looked as if he might explode. He hears music. He's just a little boy pretending to conduct an orchestra. I've taken him to concerts since he was 3, after which he can remember the entire score. Can any of your other students do the same? Do none of them ever pretend? The headmaster's smile tightened. Of course. But the hand-waving isn't the only issue. His teacher has complained that he finishes his mathematics long before the others, and that he whispers to the person in the desk next to him. Father looked at him, and Fredrick nodded. Well, if he finishes before all the others, said Father, perhaps the teacher could give him some extra work, or allow him to read. Wouldn't that occupy him and prevent him from talking to others? I don't think you understand, said the headmaster, turning his gaze to Fredrick. Can you tell us who sits in the desk next to you? With a fat lip, he could only mumble the name Hansel. And the headmaster turned to Father and smirked. Mr. Schmidt, no one sits in the desk next to him. It is empty. So who exactly is Hansel? Father knew. It was the same person that Fredrick always pretended to talk to at home. The clever Hansel. Or Hansel. From the fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel, who along with his sister survived the witch and escaped from the dark and dangerous woods. Hansel, his friend, whose courage Fredrick wished he had. He has an imagination, yelled Father. Your son is not usual and is quite possibly deficient, said the headmaster. You are right about one thing, said Father. He is not usual, but look at his exam marks, and you'll see he's not deficient. I'm not here to argue that point, though. I'm here to tell you that from now on, I will teach him. And at the end of the year, you will procure the exams and a teacher to administer them. The headmaster's smile disappeared. That is not acceptable. Father pounded his fist on the headmaster's desk. What your students did to my son is not acceptable, and I'm prepared to go to your superiors. The headmaster tensed. He lifted a file from his desk and opened it. Well, then, if that's how you wish to proceed, I see that his physician is Dr. Braun. I'm sending him a letter, asking him to recommend the boy for psychiatric evaluation. I suspect there is more wrong with him than what we've discussed. There is a place for children like him, the home for unfortunates. That's an asylum, said Father. Fredrick clutched Father's side. Elizabeth had told him about such places, where they put lunatics and took away all of their clothes except their undergarments. Could he really be sent there for conducting an imaginary orchestra and talking to a make-believe friend? His head throbbed. Father's voice shook. All this because he's not like the others? I am done being reasonable. And he put an arm around Fredrick, ushering him from the office and down the hallway, now crowded with children. And Fredrick saw the stares and heard the remarks. Monster boy's leaving. Moron. Belongs in a zoo. What was to become of him? Elizabeth went to school all day. Father worked at the factory. Would Father leave him home alone or put him away? Outside, on the front steps, he caught Father's sleeve and tugged, and Father stopped and leaned down. And Fredrick cupped his hand over Father's ear and whispered, Where will I go, Father, if I'm too dreadful for school? Father's eyes filled with tears. He kissed him on the forehead. Don't worry. I will take care of this. Come, we must stop at the factory so I might tell them why I did not come to work today. Fredrick sat outside a windowed office while Father spoke to several white coat supervisors. And he couldn't hear what Father said, but he could see his animated gestures and his pleading expressions. And afterward, Father shook hands with each of the men. One blotted his eyes with a handkerchief. And the door opened, and the supervisors filed out. The one with the handkerchief leaned down, put a hand on Fredrick's shoulder. My name is Ernst. Your father is going to take you home to rest now. But starting tomorrow, this is where you will come. Welcome to the firm. He shook Fredrick's uninjured hand. Fredrick didn't know what it meant, but he whispered, Yes, sir. And as they walked home, Father explained, I will oversee your schoolwork from now on, and every morning during the week, you will apprentice at the factory to learn about harmonica making. And in the afternoons, you'll complete the assignments I give you at a table next to my workstation. And you'll continue your music lessons with me on weekends. Do you understand? Fredrick's womb stung and his head ached, and he didn't answer. Father stopped and knelt in front of him. Fredrick, do you understand? Where I go, you will go. And he looked at Father, unbelieving. He was not going to an asylum or back to school. He would no longer have to guess at the safest route to his classroom or dodge the food thrown at him at lunchtime. He would not have to determine which corner of the play yard would provide the most protection. He smiled, tears rolling down his cheeks. Father carefully lifted Fredrick into his arms and carried him. And on the street, a car honked 3 times. And the rhythm of Toskowski's waltz took hold again. Looking back across Father's shoulder, he lifted an imaginary baton with his good arm and conducted. And when the wind brushed his face, Fredrick felt a lightness, a weightlessness, as if, bit by bit, the dread and worry that always burdened him were taking flight. Had Father not been holding him, He too might have floated away on the wind, like a dandelion's white seeded parachutes. And that's the end of chapter 3. Now, boys and girls, in this story, Fredrick is really not treated very well. And I hope that if you are not being treated well at school, that you will talk to someone who can help you. We have teachers, we have principals, we have a counselor, we have a resource officer, and we're all here. We're right here beside you. You're never alone. Please look to one of us to help you. If I don't have an answer, I will go to somebody and find the answer for you. But you're never in this world alone, and you don't have to be bullied. I hope you have a great week. I hope you liked chapter 3 and look forward to seeing you for chapter 4. Bye-bye.